So the next item of business today is a member's business debate on motion number 7597 in the name of David Stewart on the Dunoon-Gourock-Ferry-Action-Group. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I would further invite Mr Stewart to open the debate. 7 minutes, please, Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is an important debate for Argyll and Bute and beyond, and I appreciate the attendance of MSPs in the Chamber this afternoon. I'd like to thank the members who have signed my motion, and for those who have not, I, of course, always welcome sinners who wish to repent, Presiding Officer. But this is not a debate about any old ferry crossing. It's about students getting to college, teachers commuting to school, and retired farmers getting to hospital. As members will know, earlier today the Dunoon-Gourock-Ferry-Action-Group braved the elements to campaign outside Parliament and also had the opportunity to meet with MSPs. They want to ensure that there is a suitable service on this vital lifeline route. I welcome the group to Parliament from their vantage point in Committee Room 5, and I'd like to record my thanks to Group Chair Susanna Rice and also to Professor Neil Kay and Ronnie Smith, who have helped and advised me on ferry matters for many years, as they would, of course, to all MSPs, irrespective of political complexion. From the meeting with members of the Ferry Action Group earlier today, it's clear to me that the deep strength of feeling in the community that led to the formation of the group back in November 2011 is as strong today as it was then. I had the privilege of attending and speaking at one of the first Action Group organised public meetings in Dunoon, which attracted 550 local residents. Who says that public meetings are dead? I shared a platform with Mike Russell on an evening of heavy showers and storms when both ferry services were off. So both of us had to drive via the rest and be thankful, an oxymoron if there ever was one. I was struck by the passion, engagement, indeed anger of local residents about the failure of ferry services. Following the group's inception, they settled on a mission statement, calling on the Scottish Government to deliver a frequent, safe, reliable vehicle and passenger ferry service between Dunoon Town Centre and Gourock Rail Terminal. Gourock to Dunoon even has its own historians, who know every nuance of the Lloyd Touche report, the holy grail and the genesis of this debate. But if you're an ordinary commuter from Dunoon to Gourock, you don't have to read the report to know the service is adequate. Alec Neil described the Alicat, one of the boats on the service, as not fit for purpose. But in the Chamber today, we know that Dunoon to Gourock is much more than about going from A to B. It's much more than a simple transport system, and it's much more than interpretations of some obscure maritime cabotage regulation. It's about a sense of identity of a community. It's about economic regeneration. It's about freedom to access jobs, health services and leisure. Where do we go from here? Well, I will not rehash in the brief time, Presiding Officer, the checkered, confused and sometimes conflicted history of Gourock to Dunoon ferry services, which are well documented in the excellent Dunoon Observer, who are represented here today.
Mike Russell.
Can I congratulate the member for getting the debate? And the only reason I didn't sign the motion is because ministers don't sign backbench motion. But can I make the point that the success of the campaign for a reliable commuting route, which I am thoroughly behind, will depend, the success on this campaign has always depended on the parties and the communities working with the press and others, and that the work that you and I have tried to do together is part of the foundation of that, as it should be across this chamber.
David-Stewart.
Well, I think it's really important that we work with community groups and all political parties to try and achieve a solution to this problem. The MVA Consultants Report was published in June for Transport Scotland. It says, and I quote, Presiding Officer, "Given the assumptions made here, a passenger and vehicle ferry service, it would be feasible under a two-vessel scenario. It would attract the level of market share and therefore generate sufficient incremental revenue to cover the various incremental costs of delivering the service." Unquote. In my view, Presiding Officer, we need CMAL to provide two purpose-built vessels engineered for this crossing and to consult local communities on what they want in terms of onboard facilities. This would take around 18 months to 2 years, according to CMAL. Vessels, of course, should be capable of carrying cars, but no cross-subsidisation would be allowed because that isn't allowed under EU regulations. In the event of Argyll Ferries not winning the next tender, vessels should go to the successful bidder. This happened when, of course, Serco won the Northlink contract. the EU ruled that there could be a vehicle service on the route and that government could supply the vessels for the service and require all bidders to use the supplied vessels, even if some of the bidders had vessels that would be cheaper. There also, presiding officer, could be a short-term option, and that's using the MV Carusk as a temporary measure. This was highlighted to me when I met the Ferry Action Group in the Queen's Hall in Dunoon recently. As members will well know, the MV Carusk is a relief vessel in the winter, and it does take cars, and it also used the route, I think, in 2004. The Cabinet Secretary may wish to refer to this in her wind-up. The other aspect is, if we are going ahead with two new builds, if there were hybrid vessels, that's diesel and electricity, it may be possible to access the new programme structural funds for 2014 to part fund the build through the low-carbon economy. And again, perhaps the Cabinet Secretary could agree to explore this issue with her officials. The strength of Argyll and Bute communities is the resilience. I was speaking to a Dunoon lawyer, Ewan MacDonald, recently, and he described how the local area fought back when the US Navy pulled out of the Holy Loch. Local activists rallied, they campaigned, and they knocked together the heads of politicians until they developed a sensible and practical new option which provided diversification and new jobs in the area. We need to reinvent that can-do attitude. A solution can be found with two new vessels, custom-built for the crossing, capable of taking cars. The time is right to think again, and Argyll and Bute deserves better. Second best is not enough, and to rehash an old political slogan, 2 boats or no votes. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Stuart McMillan to be followed by Jamie McGregor. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. At the outset, I want to declare that my wife works for Caledonian McBrain. She's based in Gourock. I want to commend David Stewart for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I've never changed my opinion with regards to the Gourock-Dunoon ferry route, and certainly for the official record, I would like to see the Gourock-Dunoon route being returned to being a passenger and a vehicle-operated ferry. That said, I recognise that it isn't an easy process, and it's obviously the solution that many people have been campaigning for some time. I know that my colleague Mike Russell, MSP, has been a strong voice to get the route returned to being a passenger and a vehicle ferry as well, and I'm sure that he will certainly continue to campaign for this position. And furthermore, I'm sure that his support as a local MSP for Argyll and Bute will be important as the campaign progresses. Presiding Officer, I would like the route to be returned to being a passenger and vehicle ferry for a number of reasons. For it to provide the town centre vehicle access, for it to provide competition on the Clyde, and also I'm sure that it will have an environmental benefit in terms of reduced carbon emissions, with less traffic actually heading through Gourock to go to use the Western Ferries route. And I'm also sure that it will provide greater reliability and efficiency as a longer ferry, and certainly as bigger ferries will actually be required to actually do the route. The current vessels are not perfect, and it's clear that the MV Alicat isn't reliable, particularly in the harsher months. And with a vehicle and passenger ferry, there clearly it would be economic advantages for both sides of the River Clyde. Now, furthermore, there may also be an opportunity for a new ferry to operate the route. I mean, certainly, whether it's a second-hand ferry or whether it's a new ferry or it's more than one, as David Stewart was talking about, then I'm sure that would be advantageous. And particularly, I mean, if it were to be a new ferry or new ferries, then that would certainly open up the opportunity for Clyde-based shipbuilders as well as other shipbuilders to actually tender for the work, and that certainly would have an even better economic benefit, certainly for the west of Scotland. As I said, Presiding Officer, it's my aim with regards to the Gourock-Dunoon route for it to be returned to being a passenger and vehicle ferry. But I do appreciate, however, that there is a short-term matter that needs to be addressed, as well as certainly the longer term, and the short-term matter being the unreliability of the MV Alicat. Now, secondly, certainly in terms of the longer term, there is the issue of the EU, and that does need to be addressed. But this has been an issue. The EU has been an issue for many, many years, and at least there has been some movement in it in recent years in trying to deal with it, as compared to the situation in the past, and that sometimes been on the sidelines and never fully been taken on. Now, I would like to commend certainly the hard work, the dedication, and the determination of all the campaigners who care so much about this particular route. I also would like to particularly thank the members of the Dunoon-Gourock-Ferry-Action-Group. Their focus and drive is certainly helping progress this issue. And finally, I would also like to thank both the current Cabinet Secretary and our predecessor, Alex Neil MSP, for ensuring that actually the dialogue regarding this issue has continued, and certainly for attempting to find both the short-term and also longer-term solutions to the Gourock-Dunoon route. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Jamie McGrigor to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I congratulate David Stewart on securing today's debate, and I too welcome constituents from the Dunoon-Gourock-Ferry-Action-Group to the Parliament today. They are to be congratulated for their efforts in highlighting what are genuine and strongly felt local concerns, and for continuing to press the Scottish Government. One said to me today, the town of Dunoon is dying, and it'll die quicker without a regular town centre ferry service. And no one should forget that Dunoon is a gateway to the Highlands and also to the Lomond National Park. Now, I note from the motion that the DGFA was formed in 2011, although I know the strength of feeling goes back much further than that, including a packed meeting, one of many, in the Queen's Hall in Dunoon in the first Parliament, when Labour's own Sarah Boyack was Transport Minister, and she talked about an integrated transport policy, ferry, rail and road. Ferries have always been a hot potato in Dunoon, quite rightly so. They are building a new fourth road bridge with public money. Well done. No chance of that on the Clyde, though. So adequate, reliable ferries are the next best option. And the SNP did promise them. I was there. I vividly remember the run-up to the 2007 Scottish Parliament election, when the then SNP candidate and subsequent constituency MSP for Argyll and Bute, Jim Mather, a very fine man, promised that there would be 2 new vehicle ferries on the town centre Gourock-Dunoon route. Local people knew only too well that this promise was not fulfilled, as excuse after excuse was made. Not even a rowing boat appeared. Instead, since July 2011, the service was reduced to the Argyll Ferries passenger-only one on this route. And as David Stewart has set out today, local residents and visitors have been angry and dismayed, understandably so, at the performance of the Argyll ferries, particularly in bad weather, where the suitability of the vessels remains a big concern. And the most recent figures which I obtained through a written answer this week demonstrates how poor the performance is compared with other CalMac services, and I know these other services very well myself, as I often use them. And given that the Argyll Ferries contract is due to continue until June 2017, achieving reliability on this route must be the key and immediate priority. And given that the Argyll Ferries is subsidised by the taxpayer, ministers ultimately have a duty to ensure the reliability of Argyll Ferries. This is the very least that local commuters and visitors deserve. And a 32% cancellation rate of Argyll Ferry sailings in March this year is simply not acceptable. CalMac's record elsewhere is so good, so we must assume it is due to the wrong type of vessel. I understand the desire to be connected directly to Gourock railway station, although arrangements in the station sometimes could be improved also. And I understand the argument that the vehicle service which has been taken away is a service which the government said could be profitable themselves. But the residents of Dunoon and Carl do have, in contrast to being let down by successive Scottish governments over the town centre to town centre service, thankfully been well served for the past 40 years by the alternative Western Ferries passenger and vehicle service, which is frequent, reliable, affordable, and its fares are cheaper than the subsidised service. It receives not 1 penny of subsidy from the taxpayer. And I'm delighted that Western Ferries will soon have 2 brand new British-built vessels on the route, the MV Sound of Seal and the MV Sound of Surrey, which will further increase Western Ferries' capacity and already exemplary reliability record, and which demonstrate the company's commitment to the communities which they serve. I'll get this open. Before the removal of the subsidised vehicle town centre route in 2011, Western Ferries was in fact carrying a majority of vehicles between Gourock and the Cowal Peninsula. And there is a good connecting bus service from Dunoon to Glasgow via Western Ferries, but it does not go to the railhead. And I recognise that the Dunoon-Gourock-Ferry-Action-Group are continuing to campaign for a reinstated vehicle and passenger service on the town centre route. I note that the Scottish Government's feasibility study has suggested that a vehicle and state-subsidised passenger service on the town centre route could be feasible, although many ferry industry operators do remain sceptical. It is for the Scottish Government, therefore, to set out in detail on what best basis such a ferry service could be feasible and how this would comply with the EU regulations on competition. Because if the vehicle service made a profit, that would satisfy
to a close,
the EU.
please.
How much of the extra capital funded allocated for ferries in 2015-16 is specifically for the Dunoon-Gourock route? I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say on this subject. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Now call on Rhoda Grant, and after that we'll move to the Deputy First Minister for the response from the Government.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I too congratulate David Stewart for securing this debate? I think it's extremely important that it comes to this Parliament. I'd also like to pay tribute to the Ferry Action Group for their tenacity. They've been campaigning on this, as David said, for a long number of years, and I'm glad they're in the Parliament today bringing forward that campaign. But they've not only been pushing people, they've also been looking for solutions, and I think they need to be, tribute needs to be paid to them for that. I was in Dunoon recently and I saw the alley cat coming in, and I decided to go down to the pier and watch it berth, just out of interest, something to do. It was a lovely day for a walk. I watched it coming in, and what really, I think, brought home to me the nub of the problem was that even on that beautiful day, the gangway was moving in a way that you would be happy to see a seesaw moving. It was going up and down. I don't know how the people coming on and off the ferry were actually holding their feet. You had mums with buggies who weren't able to hold on to the gangway because they obviously had children in their buggies. You had older people who must, I mean, I don't imagine their bravery trying to get on and off that boat. And again, people having bags, shopping, luggage and the like. It looked horrendous, and I'm just not clear how any health and safety risk assessment could have allowed that ferry to sail, even in those conditions, to allow people on and off safely. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at as a matter of urgency. Obviously, trying to get on and off a ferry doing that kind of thing will discourage people from using the ferry. That will then impact on jobs from the tourism industry, but also people maybe looking to come to Dunoon to create a business and looking to commute back and forth. There's also the problem of the Rest and Be Thankful, the other route into Dunoon, albeit longer. But last winter we saw the road closed on numerous occasions because of landslides, and that basically cut Dunoon off if it weren't for Western ferries. But certainly those that do not have a car are least served by this service. And I think that's an equality issue, because if you can't afford a car, can't drive to Western ferries, then really you don't have the opportunity of looking for a job over on the other side. And when I was speaking to people, they were saying to me that young people who were commuting town centre to town centre in order to work were finding that their employers were losing patience with them because they weren't turning up to work when they should, because the ferry couldn't sail. So some of the problems I've referred to is, you know, the issues when the ferry is actually sailing, but when people can't actually get to their work because it doesn't sail and it's not reliable, is a big problem. I'd also heard anecdotal accounts about people being on the ferry where they had to lie on the floor, where people were being thrown about, and it was a terrifying experience. All that adds up to a lack of confidence in the service and things that need to be addressed very quickly. From the government, we've heard warm words. What we really now need is action. The solution is in their hands, and hopefully when the Minister winds up today, we'll get a view of what that solution could be.
Many thanks. I now call on Nicola Sturgeon, Deputy First Minister, 7 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to Dave Stewart for securing this debate, as it gives me the opportunity to update the Chamber on our work with the Ferry Action Group and others to bring about improvements that are undoubtedly needed to the Gourock-Dunoon ferry service. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the Ferry Action Group for the work that they do and welcome them to the Scottish Parliament today. I'm also very grateful to my colleague Mike Russell, the constituency MSP for Argyll and Bute, who has been absolutely assiduous in representing the interests of his constituents on this issue. He has ensured since I took responsibility for this issue, that I am in no doubt whatsoever about the implications for his constituents of the problems experienced on the passenger service. I thought Dave-Stewart summed up those implications and the importance of this service very well in his opening remarks, and Mike Russell has also ensured that I understand the strong local desire to see, if it can be achieved, the restoration of a passenger and vehicle service serving the town centre route. So I want to thank him for all of that. Obviously, the service has a long history which has led to the situation that we've heard described today. I don't think there's anything to be gained by me today from trying to apportion blame for what's happened in the past. In the 12 months since I took on responsibility for this work, I've tried to focus very much on seeking lasting solutions and encouraged others to do the same. My predecessor, Alec Neil, established the Dunoon-Gourock Ferry Services Steering Group, and of course the Action Group has been an active member of that steering group alongside Argyll and Bute Council and Inverclyde Council, and I very much welcome the local knowledge and vital user experience that the Action Group brings to the discussions that we have. The shortcomings of the current service are well documented. The weather reliability statistics, particularly for last winter, tell a very clear story. However, I want at this point just to stress that this is in no way the fault of the crews of the Argyll ferry vessels. They strive to provide the best service they can under the understandably very close scrutiny of the users of the service. But the hard fact is that the vessels, in particular the MV Alicat, have failed to perform reliably in poor weather. And given the weather that we all know is experienced in... yes, I will.
Amy McGregor.
Thank the Minister for taking the intervention. I'm sure that there were a lot of warnings that the Alicat was not going to be a good enough vessel. So why was it progressed with?
First Minister.
I'm more than happy to discuss these issues with anybody. I hope in the time that's available to me, I want to focus on the future and what we're doing to try to fix things. That's the approach I've brought to this issue, and I hope Jamie McGregor will forgive me if I'm going to focus on these issues in my speech. But these are conversations that are had regularly, as I'm sure he is aware. I was talking about the weather reliability. You know, we have typical Scottish weather. All ferry services can be and often are affected by prevailing conditions, but the level of disruption during the last winter on this route was simply unacceptable, and I have no hesitation in saying that. New vessels are needed. To date, we've not been able to source suitable replacement vessels from the market, so I have been exploring short-term options and can today propose 2 specific changes for the coming winter period. Firstly, following a proposal from the Action Group, Argyll Ferries have looked into making the more reliable Argyll Flyer the lead vessel connecting with the fast trains from Gourock to Glasgow, and they are now ready to make that happen. But secondly, I've been considering the options for this coming winter based on the vessels that are available in the wider Calmac fleet. And following consultation with Argyll Ferries and very careful consideration of the issues involved in this, I can announce to Parliament today that I do intend to approve the deployment of the MV Kursk when she becomes available this winter to carry passengers on key peak sailings and to be on standby at other times. Now, I should stress to Parliament that the operational details of this still require to be finalised, but nevertheless I hope that this confirmation today will come as welcome news to the local people concerned, of course.
Well, the member give way. I'm grateful.
Mike Russell.
It's the first time I've intervened on the front bench, but I do want to make the point that my constituents will greatly welcome the Kursk on this route. I presume that the operator will also monitor the performance both of the Argyll Flyer and the Kursk in terms of reliability and keeping to its timetable so that we can avoid the difficulties of the previous winter.
Deputy First Minister.
Yes, I can give an assurance that that will be the case. I want to, in the time remaining to me, turn to the longer term, because obviously short-term solutions are only part of the story here. Our stated policy objective is to provide a safe, reliable, frequent commuter ferry service between Dunoon town centre and the rail terminal at Gourock. In addition, we have said, and I will say again today, that our wish, like that of the Action Group, is that this service carries vehicles as well as passengers. Now, during the European Commission's investigation that concluded in 2009, we argued for the continuation of a subsidised town centre service. However, the existence of an unsubsidised service provided by Western Ferries persuaded the Commission that there was no public service need for a subsidised vehicle ferry service on the town centre route. That said, we were able to demonstrate to the Commission that there was a clear public service need for a subsidised passenger service, and furthermore that the operator of this service could also carry vehicles at their own commercial risk. The Commission has recently reconfirmed these points to my officials, and however frustrated members across the chamber may sometimes be at decisions like this, I hope and expect that everybody understands that we require to comply with Commission rules and play by those rules. However, we commissioned a study into the feasibility of providing a vehicle and passenger service with only the passenger carrying element receiving subsidy. And as Dave Stewart quoted in his opening speech, that study found that using optimal, this is not the bit you quoted actually, but forgive me, using optimal passenger vessels, a high level of reliability could be achieved, albeit with an increased subsidy. But, and this is the bit you quoted, the study also found that a vehicle carrying service was commercially viable if it received that same increased passenger subsidy. Therefore, we can achieve our objective of a safe, reliable, frequent commuter ferry service. Briefly, yes, if I've got time.
Could I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her comments about the Kursk? As I highlighted in my speech, I'm delighted that the Government's looking at this option. And just in case the Cabinet Secretary doesn't have a second to look at that, for the longer term, if the Government was looking at purchasing 2 new vessels, could she ask her officials to look at whether the use of structural funds can be provided, particularly for hybrid vessels, because I do believe there's opportunities there which will, of course, reduce the cost to Government.
I'm happy to ask my officials to look at all of the suggestions that have been made in the course of the debate. I just want to finish by stating the intention of the Government following the publication of the consultancy report to go forward and explore the potential for an operator that's prepared to take the commercial decision to provide a vehicle service. The operator would have to be able to demonstrate to the Commission that there was no subsidy paid for passengers being used to distort competition with Western ferries for the carriage of vehicles. But my officials will be engaging with potential operators to see and to test that commercial interest. The steering group will have a role in this. I note the idea of a community enterprise company, and I think that is something that is also worthy of further exploration. Once I've received and considered the feedback we get from this exercise, I will be able to consult with the steering group on the options and next steps. I very much would like these discussions to be completed this year so that we're able to move forward decisively and get on with putting into place the service that the people of Cowal and Dunoon need and deserve. So I hope that's been a useful update of the work the Government is doing. I hope the announcements I've made today for the short term will be welcomed, but I hope I've also managed to demonstrate the long-term commitment of the Government to make sure we do the right things for the long term to give local people the service they deserve.
Many thanks. And I now suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2:30.